What is the beneficial ownership information filing?
Well, it's a result of some legislation that was passed in 2021 by Congress called the Corporate Transparency Act. And let me give you a little bit of history about how that happened, why it happened, and what the results are. Uh, I'm sure you all remember the scandal that happened about eight or 9 years ago called the Panama Papers. The
Yes.
Panama Papers was a leak that occurred from a law firm in Panama that had been setting up offshore companies, mostly in Panama, but really all over the world for individuals, for what many people thought were drug cartels, for all kinds of good and bad reasons. And the Panama Papers was a release of about 11.5 billion documents involving over 200,000 private companies, financial information, owners, etc., that a lot of governments took a look at and said, whoa, this is not good that all of these companies and papers and individuals, this is a way to hide money, to move money for illegal types of things. Europe for many years has had uh, beneficial ownership being who owns companies, information that was accessible and available to the law enforcement agencies. That's not been the case in the United States. For example, I, as a lawyer, I could set up a limited liability company here in Oklahoma or in any other state, and who the owners are was not public information. It wasn't disclosed. It wasn't something that the government could look at and find out who owned that company. And there are good and bad reasons for that, but I mean, primarily most people wanted their businesses to be private. Now, with that said, of course, the Internal Revenue Service, when you file your tax returns, those tax returns have who the owners are, et cetera. But that was typically not available for governmental agencies and for law enforcement to be able to dig into to find out who owns stuff. So, Panama Papers, scandal, European government pressure for law enforcement issues here in the United States finally got Congress in 2021 to pass the Corporate Transparency Act that was a part of a larger governmental acts that were passed. And then the regulatory stuff was forwarded on to the Department of Treasury, to their Financial Crimes Enforcement, or FinCEN, to develop regulations on how companies should report who the owners of those companies were, who the people that controlled those companies were, so law enforcement could have access to that information. Now, FinCEN is, I don't know if you remember the movie in the last few years called The Accountant. Great movie, but the governmental agency that was investigating this account was FinCEN. And so, if you've seen that movie, then you know who they are. It's a small department of the Department of Treasury, and they basically are in charge of investigating financial crimes. So FinCEN has spent the last 3 years putting together regulations on how companies should report who the beneficial owners are and who the control people are for companies here in the United States. So that's kind of a general background of what's happened. Those regulations kicked in effective January 1st of this year. And so
Of 24. They have kicked in. Yeah.
Have kicked in. And
Gotcha.
what those regulations basically provide is that companies that were formed prior to the beginning of 2024 have 1 year to report who the beneficial owners are using this system that FinCEN has developed. And so, I can kind of jump right in on what companies have to report. Basically, if you look at the statistics, there's about 33 million small businesses in the United States.
Okay.
Now, not all of those businesses are companies that have been formed by filing with the Secretary of State of the state where they're organized, or with a tribal entity or whatever, but many of them are. So if you're a company that, say, here in Oklahoma, has filed articles of organizations as a limited liability company, or a certificate of incorporation for a corporation, or a limited partnership certificate, then you are subject to these reporting requirements unless you fall under an exemption.